All right, folks, here we are again. It is 2:30 in the morning, which is why I have to be quiet and not my spirited self. I'm in my night gear, the family is asleep, but I felt it necessary to make another one of these videos because there is so much that is happening right now as a result of the brutal murder of these 6 hostages. Now, here's what I hope to do. A lot of talking heads right now are talking about these people that were killed, and they deserve to have their names read. They deserve to be discussed. There needs to be a dialogue that is significant concerning what happened and the issues that are going on there. But what I hope to do in this brief time that I spend with you is show you the things that are not being talked about and the things that aren't being considered. And I've put in a lot of time to consider these things. I want to bring them to your attention because there are much bigger issues that are going on here than the hostages that have died. And by the way, those are big issues. Those aren't small things. It's a big deal when these precious lives are being taken. But there's a lot of things that you have to be aware of. First of all, let me just simply say this. The hostages that were killed by Hamas were undoubtedly killed because of the weakness that's going on in American leadership. Now, I know that that's going to sound like a crazy statement to make. For some people are going to have a hard time with that statement, but I need you to understand what's happening here. The weaker American leadership becomes, and the crazier people in the United States of America begin to get because of their ignorant and uninformed perspectives with respect to what's actually happening with Hamas and the conflicts that are happening as a result, is going to contribute to the problems that we are seeing right now, not only in the Middle East, but all over the world. So let me just simply start by saying this. There is a very specific reason why these hostages were the ones that were killed. There's a very specific reason why one hostage in specific, one that we're focusing on very clearly, was killed. One that I want us to focus on. And there's a reason why things are happening the way that they're happening right now. Now, forgive me if I sound a little discombobulated. I woke up at 4 o'clock this morning because it's Sunday and we had a long day. We do 4 services on Sunday. And then, of course, it's been a crazy day. And here I am not sleeping yet, but I need to do this now because if I don't, things that are important to get out are not going to get out. So if you hear me fumble on a few words, it's all good. It's just me being a little tired. So let's talk about some of these facts. First of all, we have to talk about all of the wars that are going on all over the world. If I don't spend any time talking about the armed conflicts that are taking place and the potential for armed conflicts, then none of this is going to make sense. And you're not going to really understand the dynamic that's happening in the Middle East and how it eventually relates to Bible prophecy. Because so much of this can be understood and put together when you consider all the variables that are involved and the things that are contributing to what is actually happening. Now, we talked about this a lot in 2023. There were specifically 10 or 11, maybe even 12 hot spots that we were focusing on last year that we spent a lot of time discussing. As a matter of fact, prior to what happened on October the 7th last year, there were a lot of discussions that we were having regarding all of these different areas. Now, off the top of my head, I'm going to try to bring these to you, and then I want to talk to you specifically about 18 or 19 armed conflicts that are taking place this year and why that's important. I'm going to try to be very quick about this, but it's important that you develop an understanding, because if you do not understand the basic premise that right now we are dealing with weakness in American leadership, then none of this is going to end up making sense. And so much of what's happening around the world is a direct result of weakness in American leadership. And you have to understand that's going to explain why we're seeing much of the things that we're seeing. And that also explains why we understand what we understand in Bible prophecy. The Bible actually makes it very, very clear that the United States of America is inconsequential by virtue of the fact that it's not even mentioned in Bible prophecy. And I think there's a reason why that's happening, and I think it's beginning to formulate and manifest itself characteristically in many of the things that are happening. It's not a secret that so much of what the Biden regime has done has weakened the position of the United States of America. We have made it a practice to tell people no. We've made it a practice to tell people to back off. We've made it a practice to create these lines for people that we don't enforce. And all at the same time, while we're doing that, we're actually becoming warmongers. And we talked about this in 2023. We contributed to a lot of major problems that we saw beginning to rise up in 2023, and now in 2024, they've gotten way worse. So let's go over this for a second, because then it's going to help you make sense of the hostage situation. It's going to help you make sense of what's happening in Israel, and it's going to make a whole lot more sense in context of everything that's happening. And I hope that when you give me another 15 minutes of your time or so, maybe 20 minutes, all of this is going to make sense, at least to a degree where you can put it together and understand what's happening, okay? So first thing that you have to recognize right away are some of the discussions that we were having in 2023. And that's really, really important that you see this. The first thing that we identified was we talked about the tensions that were increasing substantially with China and Taiwan. Now, we contributed to this. The United States of America contributed to this. Nancy Pelosi was probably one of the bigger contributors of this. Joe Biden was a significant contributor of this, because he basically told American citizens in China that if they did not walk away from the companies that they were actually a part of, that they would lose their citizenship, knowing full well that an overwhelming majority of the CEOs that were working in these companies in China were contributing substantially in the area of semiconductor production. So when they all packed up and went, then the semiconductor production in China went bye-bye, which increased the need for China to begin to focus on Taiwan. And then when American leadership showed its non-existent self to China with respect to things that were happening in Hong Kong, and that's a very, very complicated issue, we basically gave China a pass on a whole bunch of levels. By the way, I want to make myself clear, if you want to understand the significance of Hong Kong, which you need to understand, then I would very much look at Dr. Arnn from Hillsdale College. In my opinion, he's probably one of the most significant subject matter experts on that issue and the dynamics that exist there. And I would spend some time looking at that, especially with respect to the agreement that the Brits made with respect to that. Now, we spent a little bit too much time on this, but I want to bring that to your attention, because this is going to become important when we start talking about 2024. Of course, we spent a lot of time talking about Ukraine and the contribution to what happened with Ukraine by warmongers. Specifically, Kamala Harris had a huge part in actually bringing up this rhetoric of the expansion of NATO. By the way, it wasn't just the Democrats that did this. The Republicans did this as well. Lindsey Graham and several other people that were talking about this. They pretty much pushed Putin into Ukraine, which is something we talked about. We also talked about our concerns with significant amounts of cyber attacks that are taking place all across, not just the North American continent, but our concerns with Europe and so on and so forth. We talked about North Korea's nuclear ambitions and why that becomes a significant issue. We also talked about how it affects South Korea and the position that they are in, and its relationship to Japan, and of course the relationship that it has as well with China and the United States of America. These are very significant issues. We talked about the civil unrest that was beginning to increase in Russia and the areas around Russia. And by the way, that civil unrest is not the destabilization of Russia, but that civil unrest was related to other issues that the United States of America with its clandestine operators were seeking to create in an attempt to destabilize Russia in hopes of weakening their position with respect to their attacks or their standing with of course, Ukraine, sleep deprivation. But that becomes a really, really big issue. And in 2023, it was something that we were very, very concerned with. And of course, we talked about our concern with Israel and Iran. It was something we brought up, especially before October 7th. We saw that something was going to happen. We had no idea that October 7th would happen. That came as a complete shock, I think, to all of us. There was no one who was able to see that coming, at least not the way it did. I mean, we knew that Israel got pretty arrogant about their security, and we knew that something could happen. We didn't realize it would be this bad, and it would take place this bad. And then, of course, we warned about all the conflicts that were going on in the Middle East. That's, of course, my wheelhouse. And one of the things I've been very, very concerned about, we talked about the issues going on in South America, in Central America, and North America because of what we were doing with the border and the immigration issues and the concern. And then we've been talking about since 2022, the fact that the United States was in essence in a proxy war with Russia using Ukraine and using NATO. And it's something that continues to happen. And then, of course, the growing tensions between the United States and China. Now, as we jumped into 2024, there were things that became front and center because they became literal armed conflicts that became real issues to us. Obviously, we don't have to get into what happened with Gaza and what's happened as a result of that and all of the conflict that's taken place. It's affected Turkey. It's affected Libya, which, by the way, Libya is a place that Russia is very prominent in. And that brings us to a wider type of Middle Eastern war where we're watching Iran becoming affected by all of this. We're looking at areas in Asia Minor that we have to be concerned with, right? We're talking about areas like Afghanistan. We're talking about areas that are south of Russia. We're talking about many other places that kind of go in line and in that area. Let's not forget the Azerbaijan conflict with Armenia and the significance of that. We're talking about the fact that Sudan is still dealing with an internal conflict, and that conflict is significant, by the way, because if you look at Sudan's rapid support forces, which they're referred to as the RSF, what's happening there are mass casualties, especially because of, or as a result of what happened with Bashar and what took place there. And we're talking about millions of people that have died in Sudan. And this is an area that's always been of particular concern to me because the southern border of Egypt, of course, is Sudan. And for me, there's a lot there, especially when we start looking at the African continent and what that means, which, by the way, speaking of the African continent, when you start getting into Ethiopia or you start getting to Sahel, which, by the way, when you talk about Sahel for a second, that affects areas like Niger, Mali, and some of these other areas. And one of the things that you have to understand is when you start looking at the area of Niger and Nigeria, the United States of America and their weakness has shown its ugly face again because, yes, we spent hundreds of millions of dollars to build and maintain an Air Force over there, our Air Force, but an air base that supports our Air Force, and that air base got abandoned. As a matter of fact, the final abandonment of that air base finishes within the next couple of weeks, and it contributes to so much of the instability that we're seeing there, which, by the way, has a tremendous effect on the country that is south of Morocco, which, of course, is Western Sahara. And that has a significant effect on what's going on with Israel because of Israel's recent decision to stand in solidarity with Morocco's position with respect to that. And we're not even finished with the African continent. There's so much more on the African continent that we can talk about. But let's stop for a second to talk about a little bit Myanmar and the craziness that is going to bring into play, especially when you look at the effects that it's having with respect to much of the displacement dynamics that are taking place there and how it's eventually going to spill into India and Pakistan and some of these other areas. Folks, that spillover could affect so many other issues. It could affect China on a significant level. It could affect India on a significant level. And by the way, the destabilization mechanism that could be produced by the spillover just from that conflict alone could throw so much in the water. And by the way, I'm still not done with so many of the other areas that we have to be considering and looking at. And by the way, all the ones that I'm mentioning all relate to major areas that become significantly affected as a result of the weakness in United States leadership. And please, don't think for 1 second that the weakness in United States leadership is characterized by not showing enough of a military force. Because oftentimes you can have a big military and continue to display weakness by warmongering. I think that when you're warmongering, you can also display a whole bunch of weakness because in reality, you are fundamentally putting on display your lack of willingness to be able to deploy the most important aspect of any nation's feature, and that's diplomacy. And diplomacy has died. And the United States of America wants to put itself on so many levels, at least under this regime, and they are creating this crazy level of instability in all of these areas. Let's go back to Ethiopia for just a second, because it is a multi-front problem. Ethiopia just does not affect the issues with the Tigray War. It doesn't affect Amhara or Oromo, which, by the way, if you want to go back and do a little bit of look into that, that kind of stuff is absolutely crazy, how it begins to carry into Eritrea and some of the things that we've talked about that relate to the Red Sea. And if we're going to talk about the Red Sea for just a second, because that's really, really important as well, then you have to consider the Arabian Peninsula. You have to consider Saudi Arabia. You have to consider Yemen, because Yemen is such a massive part of much of the problem that we're seeing, especially after Israel took it upon itself to do something that the United States of America could not do, even after the United States of America deployed a carrier group into the Persian Gulf and into a portion of the Red Sea in order to keep the Yemeni Houthis from being as effective as they've been. And in reality, the United States of America failed to do that, especially with the joint, I don't know what you want to call it, the joint forces that they put together with other countries that were scared to engage. I'm not going to call it scared, but they were incapable of engaging the way that they needed to, because they're not paying attention. And so this has created a big problem. And let's not mention the fact, or how about we not forget the fact, we're going to mention it. How about we not forget the fact that on the coast of Ethiopia, right now as we speak, and Sudan, Russia has a significant position. Their bearing in the Red Sea is significant. It's no small place. And by the way, they're also jockeying for a significant area in the southern Mediterranean, which would be the northern border of Libya. And since Gaddafi was killed, very likely by the United States of America, you have to understand that it created a civil war, that the United States of America, even under the Clinton administration, well, let me talk, not the Clinton administration, the Clinton State Department under Barack Obama, actually thought they could get, this would be quick. We'd be able to get in there, create some instability, and put our positions in a way that allow us to have control over this foundational part of the southern Mediterranean. Well, that backfired because of a small little town named Benghazi, as you remember. And because of that, now we have this massive civil war that's taking place. Russia is on the winning side of that civil war, and it won't be long until they hold a strong position there. And by the way, Algeria is probably welcoming that position. And so when you start looking at the geopolitics of that area alone, it can become overwhelming. It can become overwhelming, which, by the way, let me just simply tell you this. We talked about Sahel. We talked about what's going on in Nigeria. We talked about Niger. How about we skip over to Haiti? How about we talk about what's going on in Haiti right now and the problems with gangs? You guys have been seeing some posts by my friend Victor Marx, who's dealing with fending off these gangs that are wanting to destroy these orphanages where these poor innocent kids are. But these gangs are a much bigger problem. And if you want to talk about armed conflicts that are taking place, the rise in the gang activity in Haiti is a direct result of the United States foreign policy as it relates to the position in Haiti. And that was a spillover mess from what Clinton and Bush did, and the destructive efforts that they put into that place while hustling the American people for a whole bunch of money and making some serious errors that actually changed the geopolitics of the region. And that's a whole other ball of wax that we could literally spend hours and hours and hours talking about. And as I mentioned before, there's a big problem with Armenia and Azerbaijan, what happens in its relationship to Turkey when we start talking about the conflict and the regional stability, especially how it relates to areas that are sympathetic towards Russia's causes with the former Soviet Union. And when you start talking about the effect of the Russian Federation north of that area with the Baltic Sea and the Black Sea and so on and so forth, folks, you just have a literal powder keg that's going to blow up. And we haven't even talked about the issue with United States and China and why that's such a big deal and why we need to be concerned about that. Because if you've heard about the conflict that's going on in the South China Sea, and you see this thing where there's a couple of boats that have collided with the Philippines and what's going on with that whole situation, All of that is because of American weakness. All of that is China basically saying, I'm going to push the envelope in the South China Sea. And by the way, that is in direct conflict with international maritime law. As a matter of fact, the international courts have found against what China is doing with their assertion that they should have possession over portions of the South China Sea. And contrary to what the courts have ruled, they don't care. They're just willing to push the envelope because they understand the position of American weakness that's going to cause them to continue to do the nonsense that they're doing. Folks, it's getting bad. It's getting really, really bad. And then when you start looking at Venezuela, how about we talk, but I never can mention that. I always say Venezuela. It's Venezuela, but I always mess up. But let's talk about Venezuela's, I did it again, there it is, problems in, well, they're creating problems for us in the fact that they are now threatening other countries. And when we start getting into those threatenings and the craziness of Maduro and all the other things that have happened, all the lingering nonsense that is that's inexistent there, the regional responses, which include Brazil's troop force that's sticking around, and all of the things that are actually happening as Latin America is beginning to destabilize. Guys, it's crazy. I don't even have to get into the discussion of El Salvador and how so much of those changes have actually affected the United States southern border and so many of the other things that are going on. Understand this, folks. Maduro's policies alone have the ability to destabilize all of Latin America. Okay? And again, if we had a strong American leadership position that was anti-war, having a big stick and being ready to use it, we would not have this problem. And by the way, did I mention that we have, as of the moment that you are watching this video, we don't have a single carrier group in the Pacific? Like, what in the world? And I'm going to tie this into the hostages in just a second because I think it's really, really, really important to think about this. And then what about all of what we would call the subsea sabotages that are taking place in the northern Baltic Sea off of Ireland's coast? Have you been paying attention to any of that? Have you been seeing what Russian naval activities are doing as they're over there looking around at the infrastructural issues that are going on? Or what about NATO stepping in and protecting Ireland? Why isn't there any real course of action taking place there? Why is it that Section 5, or I call it Section 5, Article 5 isn't being considered? Folks, there's so much insanity going on and warmongering taking place, and the United States of America is literally enjoying watching this under the leadership of, or the non-leadership of President Biden. His handlers are continuing to create these things. And how about this, folks? How about the Russian naval activities that exist all over the region of Georgia? Okay? How about what may be the significant collapse of some of the countries around that area, and the Russian Federation continuing to move forward in what they're doing? Do you think that Russia is losing the war in Ukraine? Ukraine is losing 2,000 soldiers a day, bare minimum, to Russia's maybe 10. Folks, that's no joke. It's crazy when you think about that. That's the insanity that we're actually observing. And then let's talk about the Arctic showdown right now with NATO and Russia. I'm telling you, we warned you guys about this 2.5 years ago. Remember, almost 3 years ago, when Putin went before NATO and he basically told NATO, you better off yourself or I'm going to off you. And by the way, that was when he was significantly involved in the UN Security Council. Matter of fact, here's a little surprise that some of you may not know. Did you know that the president of the UN Security Council, the actual presiding authority over the UN Security Council, was Russia when Russia attacked Ukraine? These are the types of things that I think everybody has to understand. And let's stop for one moment and consider the EU's position on what's going on with natural gas and energy, even with the Nord Stream pipeline that was blown up, which, by the way, America blew that pipeline up, okay? The president of the United States pretty much said that he was going to do it. So when you start looking at the craziness that's going down there, you start looking at these Arctic caps that Russia right now is saying they're going to hold fast in a position there. And in reality, Russia has the ability to diversify the way that they are diversifying. See, this is the thing people don't get. Russia is really, really good at long-term conflict. That's what they do. That's what they're great at. And I'm not a Russian apologist. I think that Putin is an evil, dark man. But let's be realistic about the things that are actually happening. And I just mentioned this, but what about the collapse of Belarus? Have we talked about what that could actually become, right? Can you think about this? There's a lot of people that say it's going to fall apart. What if it actually isn't collapsing? What if Lukashenko is actually being strengthened by a position that Russia is taking with respect to how it's fortifying the border? What do you think may actually result because of that? You think Poland might not be a little worried about what's happening there? And do you think that growing worry and growing concern is unfounded, especially when you have members of NATO right now that are saying that they will not respond via Article 5 if anybody unilaterally attacks? Think about that for just a second. Understand what can actually happen there, okay? Or Cameroon. We didn't even talk about the coup that just got lit up over there and all the crazy things that are happening. Folks, I haven't even begun to scratch the surface as into what's happening now with southern Lebanon and Hezbollah and Iran's position and the play that Iraq is making right now in seeking to ignore all of that, especially in southern Iraq, and help Saudi Arabia with the Neom project that they're doing so that they can set up modified trade routes in an attempt to create an alternative for normalization that involves Israel as a strong friend. Guys, what we're watching right now is unprecedented. We've never seen anything like this. Now let's go back to the hostages that were killed. There's one name that I want to go over because this name is going to become the most significant of all of those names. And I don't think that one name is more significant than the other. I just think relative to the conversation that we're having, we need to focus on one specific name. And that name is Hersh Goldberg Polin. He is the American hostage that was executed just 24 hours ago. I think there's significance to that. I think that was calculated. I think it was done with very specific intent and timing involved. I think that the people that executed him chose to do it in a way that it would be the most visible that it possibly could be because he's an American. And I think they picked him to make the biggest ruckus out of it because his parents spoke at the RNC, his parents spoke at the DNC, and his parents have had a loud, active voice, especially amongst the Biden regime, who have made a series of empty promises, acting as though they're in a position to be able to do something that they were not able to do. And then let's take it a step further. When you look at the weakening position of the United States with respect to how it stands with its only ally in the region, and you begin to see the splintering effect that's happening as some people within the cabinet of Netanyahu are choosing to signal in ways that they do not agree with him and are trying to subvert him, which, by the way, Netanyahu's cabinet aren't the only people that are trying to subvert him. The United States of America has been trying to do it. As a matter of fact, some of the most significant talks that the United States of America were having in that region happened to be with Iran. Before Abdullahian died, they were having regular meetings with Abdullahian. The United States of America having meetings with the head of the IRGC. I mean, what was the purpose? To subvert the leadership of Netanyahu to have him removed. And what is Netanyahu getting really, really pushed back on? Trying to secure the Philadelphia corridor, which is in essence southern Gaza, for good reason. If he can't secure the Philadelphia corridor, then guess what happens? Whole buses filled with all kinds of deadly equipment passes from the southern border, from Egypt into Gaza, and opens up a whole new door to spark up all kinds of major security concerns. But here's the problem. When you start having men like Gvir and Gallant and some of these other people that are jumping in, taking advantage of the weakness of the American administration in order to manipulate a circumstance to subvert Netanyahu. And let's not get started on Yair Lapid. Let's not get started on the movement that Bennett is trying to make to potentially maybe take power. All of the stuff that we're seeing right now relates to significant amounts of weakness. American leadership weakness that is laying prey upon Bibi Netanyahu. Now, here's the thing that we need to really be paying attention to, because we start getting into the biblical issue here. We start getting into the prophetic issue. Zechariah chapter 12 tells us that in the last days that there will be an increase in anti-Semitism. We're watching it. Look, we watched Candace Owens lose her mind over the last several months. We're watching all kinds of people that are going absolutely berserk in their anti-Israel mindset, the rhetoric that they're throwing out. People are embracing some of the worst terrorists alive. Did you ever think that the UN would be a terrorist organization in and of themselves, in that they are supporting terrorist actions in Gaza using UNRWA? Folks, the level of anti-Semitism that we're seeing is on an increase. But let's get back to Hersh Goldberg Poland. I believe that he was killed to test American resolve. I think if Trump were in office, he wouldn't be killed. Because I think if Trump were in office, he probably wouldn't even be a hostage right now. Because I think that they would expect to be completely targeted and carpet bombed if that were the case. I also think that because the current regime is in office doing what they're doing, all of the signs of the type of weakness that we continue to see growing is getting uglier and uglier and uglier and uglier. And all of these things were being done to test the resolve, not only of the American people, but to test the resolve of the American leadership's willingness to stand by the things that they're standing by. If this administration, this regime, the Biden regime, continues to have the attitude that it has, America's going to be no more in not too long of a time. Right now, the signaling that the United States of America has sent off, especially with their lack of willingness to deal with the Goldberg Poland situation, is pretty much y'all are on your own in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia has already seen it. We've talked about the drop of the petrodollar, which, by the way, the petrodollar being dropped from OPEC's world and specifically Saudi Arabia's world, all the petrodollar had any significant bearing over related to one very important issue, and that was Saudi Arabia's ability to secretly buy United States Treasury notes. That's all that was. And now Saudi Arabia is not interested in it, because they know that the loan that they call out on with the United States isn't even going to be good. So these hostages being killed is the Mideast's way of testing the resolve of the United States of America. And when the United States of America does not react, which I suspect they will not react, they'll probably give a few empty threats, then I think it's going to further destabilize the region, and we are going to see a massive northern war. I think that Hezbollah is going to get a little bit more aggressive. I think Iran is going to look for an opportunity to step in during the time that all this distraction is taking place. And I think we're going to see a regional war. Now, I don't know what that's going to look like. I don't know if it's going to be short-lived. I don't know if it's going to be one of these things where it could have happened and it got stopped at the last minute. I don't know. But what I do know is this. We are seeing God setting the stage for all the things we read about that will happen as we approach the last days. It's taking place, folks. Now, does that mean that Jesus is coming tomorrow? Well, I would love that. I would love it that Jesus would come before this video gets published. That'd be incredible. I just don't know. Christ could come in 5 minutes and he could come in 5 years. I have no idea. But the one thing that I do know we need to do is we need to spend a lot of time being in the Word of God. We need to spend a lot of time considering how serious the brevity of these matters really are. And we need to look up. Folks, here's my encouragement to you. Spend some time studying the Word. Understand what the Bible says about these things. Look, on the YouTube channel here, I have a lot of resources that are available to you guys to understand what's going on in the Mideast. Every single one of these countries that I've talked about, I've done extensive work on. And as a matter of fact, we just recently put out some videos talking about the issue with Azerbaijan and how it affects Turkey and, yes, the Russian Federation and the insanity with Armenians being killed. It's absolutely crazy, okay? We spend a lot of time talking about the Arctic NATO problem that we're actually watching. We spend a lot of time talking about Belarus and a lot of the propagandist nonsense that's going on there. We have videos on virtually everything that I've talked about. As a matter of fact, I just recently released a video that deals with the subject of what's happening in Niger and the significance of the United States withdrawing its forces from that area and leaving the airbase, by the way, leaving their assets and resources. It's Afghanistan all over again. So much of this stuff bears a tremendous amount of significance as in what's happening in the region. We've never seen anything like this before. Here's the deal. Study the Word, you guys. Study Bible prophecy. Watch, learn, be sober, don't sleep. Keep your eyes open because lots of things are happening. We're going to bring more to the table. I know that this was kind of a last-minute impromptu thing where I just wanted to talk about some of these things and why they're all important. We'll get into more significant issues. Well, they're all significant issues, but we'll get into more detailed issues as we get through the week. As a matter of fact, I will probably do a few of these impromptu videos over the next few days. I'm going to be off-site for a while, so I may record from my remote location and send those videos off to my editors so that they can bring something to the table for you guys that will be a little bit more palatable. But as things begin to change and they formulate, we'll keep you aware of what's going on. But pay attention, folks. Times are changing. All right? Love you guys. God bless you. And what time is it? It's 3:12 in the morning. I got to go to bed. Love you. God bless you.